Terrans entered the void. Overlords froze. The void had existed at the edge of the galaxy for as long as anyone could remember. Every species that had ever tried to enter it had vanished without a trace. Ships would cross the threshold and simply cease to exist. No signals, no wreckage, nothing. The Overlords had made it clear 3 million years ago. The void was forbidden. They placed massive sentinels around its border, quantum machines that would warn any ship that came too close. They wrote the law into every database, every star chart, every navigation system used by every species in the galaxy. Stay away from the void. This was not a suggestion. This was survival. The Overlords themselves were ancient beyond measure. They had long ago abandoned physical bodies and existed as pure consciousness, vast networks of thought that spanned entire star systems. They had watched civilizations rise and fall like waves on a shore. They had seen species reach for the stars and burn out like candles. They knew things that younger races could not imagine, and they feared the void. But humanity was different. Humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 70 years ago. They were children by galactic standards, barely out of their home system when they first encountered alien life. The older species looked at them with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Humans asked too many questions. They poked at things best left alone. They had a disturbing tendency to ignore warnings. When human scientists first studied the void, they saw something others had missed. The chaos at the edge of that dark region was not random. There were patterns in the energy readings, mathematical structures buried in what looked like noise. Doctor spent 5 years analyzing the data, running simulations, building models. He became convinced that the void was not empty space or broken reality. It was something else entirely. He presented his findings to the Galactic Council. The representatives of 100 species listened in polite silence. When he finished, an overlord spoke directly into his mind, its voice like ancient ice cracking. You see patterns because your mind is desperate to find meaning. This is how primitive species comfort themselves in the face of the unknowable. The void has consumed thousands of ships and millions of lives. It will consume yours if you are foolish enough to test it. Looked up at the shimmering energy field that represented the Overlord. With respect, how do you know what the void is if no one has ever returned from it? The temperature in the chamber dropped. Several alien delegates shifted nervously. We know because we are old, human. We have learned wisdom through loss. You have not. The Council rejected its proposal to mount an expedition. They refused funding, access to the Sentinel network, and formally warned Earth's government against any action regarding the void. The matter was closed. Except it wasn't. Humans had never been good at leaving things alone. The Terran High Command held a closed meeting 3 months later. Commander Sarah stood before the Admiralty Board and laid out a plan. They would build a ship specifically designed to enter the void. They would equip it with experimental technology based on human neural architecture. They would staff it with volunteers who understood the risks. The Overlords are afraid, Sarah said. They have been afraid for 3 million years. Fear makes you careful, but it also makes you blind. We need to know what is really out there. Admiral Martinez leaned forward. And if the Overlords are right, if you and your crew simply disappear? Sarah met his eyes. Then at least we tried, at least we looked. The Admiralty approved Project Threshold by a single vote. Construction began in secret at a shipyard beyond Mars. The ship was named Prometheus, after the human who stole fire from the gods. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. Sarah assembled her crew carefully, signed on immediately as Chief Science Officer. Lieutenant, one of the best pilots in the fleet, volunteered despite a young daughter waiting at home. Engineers, medical staff, linguists, and physicists all raised their hands. They knew they might not come back. They came anyway. The Prometheus launched 18 months later. By the time the Overlords detected it, the ship was already a week from the void's edge. Their response was immediate and furious. Energy beings that had not felt emotion and suddenly blazed with something close to rage. They appeared in every human channel, every broadcast, every screen on every human world simultaneously. Turn back. The voice shook planets. It resonated in the bones of every human who heard it. You do not understand what you are doing. The void is not a mystery to be solved. It is an ending. It is death. Turn back now, or you doom not only yourselves but potentially your entire species. On the Prometheus, Sarah sat in the captain's chair and looked at her crew. 43 faces looked back at her. Some were afraid. Some were excited. All were determined. Engineering status. Reality anchors are online and holding steady, Commander. Navigation. Course is locked. We cross the threshold in 2 hours. Communications. Every species in the galaxy is watching, ma'am. We are the most watched ship in history. Sarah nodded slowly. She opened a channel back to Earth, knowing this might be the last message they ever sent. To everyone listening, we are humans. We have always walked toward the things that frighten us. We have always asked questions others thought were dangerous. We have always believed that knowledge is worth the risk. Today, we honor that tradition. We enter the void not out of arrogance but out of hope. Hope that there is always more to learn. Hope that fear does not have to be the final answer. If we do not return, remember that we chose this. And remember that the question is always worth asking. Prometheus out. The ship moved forward. Behind them, the Overlords convened for the first time in 10,000 years. Their vast consciousnesses joined across light years of space, debating, arguing, remembering. Some of the younger Overlords, barely 1,000,000 years old, suggested they should stop the humans by force. The eldest rejected this. Let the humans learn. Let them become another cautionary tale. The Prometheus reached the edge of the void. On the view screens, the crew could see it clearly now. Space itself seemed to end ahead of them. Stars disappeared into a wall of absolute darkness that twisted and writhed like something alive. Energy readings spiked across every spectrum. The ship's computers struggled to process the data. Reality anchors holding, called out the engineering station. But they are under stress. Whatever is out there is pushing back. Stood beside Sarah, his eyes bright with anticipation. It is not pushing back. It is pulling us in, like gravity but operating on dimensions we do not normally perceive. Can we survive it? There is only one way to find out. Sarah took a breath. She thought about Earth. She thought about humanity spreading across the stars, always curious, always reaching. She thought about her nephew who wanted to be an astronaut. She hoped he would remember her. All hands brace for transition. Take us in, mister. His hands moved across the controls with practiced precision. The ship moved forward. The darkness swallowed them. For a moment, everything stopped. The crew felt themselves stretched across impossible distances and compressed into single points simultaneously. Time moved backward and forward. Up became down, became sideways, became nothing. Reality broke. And then suddenly it made sense. The human brain evolved over millions of years to find patterns in chaos, to create meaning from randomness, to see faces in clouds and hear voices in wind, did what it did best. It found the pattern. It understood. The crew of the Prometheus gasped as one. They could see it now. The void was not empty. It was full, fuller than normal space could ever be. It was layers of reality stacked on top of each other like pages in a book. It was time flowing in rivers that branched and merged. It was dimensions folded into shapes that had no names. It was the source code of the universe itself, visible and readable if you knew how to look. And humans, it turned out, knew how to look. 3 months passed. On Earth, memorial services were held. The Overlords declared the humans lost, another species that had learned respect for ancient wisdom too late. They began the process of sealing the void more permanently, preparing to erase the incident from history. Then the Prometheus returned. But it did not approach from the void. It did not travel through normal space. It simply appeared, materializing in orbit around the Overlord like it had always been there. The hull bore patterns that hurt to observe, geometries that should not exist in 3 dimensions. When Commander began to broadcast, her words arrived before she spoke them. The Overlords froze. For the first time in 3 million years, they did not know what to do. The impossible had happened. The humans had returned, and they had brought something back with them. Something that would change everything. Sarah stood in the observation deck of the Prometheus, looking down at the world below. It was not truly a world in the conventional sense. The Overlords had long ago transformed their home into a structure of pure energy and thought, a crystalline construct that existed half in normal space and half in dimensions beyond human perception. It was beautiful in an alien way, like looking at frozen music. Joined her, moving with a grace he had not possessed before entering the void. None of the crew moved quite the same way anymore. They had seen too much, understood too much. They had touched the fundamental nature of reality, and it had touched them back. "They are afraid," said quietly. "I can feel it. Their fear is like a cold wind blowing through dimensions." "Can you blame them?" Sarah asked. "We broke their oldest rule and survived. Worse, we came back changed." "We came back better." Sarah turned to look at him. Eyes held depths they had not possessed 3 months ago. He could see more now. They all could. The void had not destroyed them. It had expanded them. The communication came suddenly, pressing into their minds with the weight of ages. The Overlords were not pleased. "What have you done?" Sarah stepped forward, speaking aloud even though she knew they could read her thoughts. "We entered the void. We learned. We survived." "Impossible. No species survives the void." "We did, and now we understand why you never could." The pressure in her mind increased, becoming almost painful. "Explain." Sarah had expected this. She had prepared. "The void is not what you think it is. It is not broken space or a region of chaos. It is the construction layer of reality. It is where the universe writes its own code. You could not enter it because you are too rigid. You transcended physical form millions of years ago. You became pure thought, pure consciousness. You crystallized yourselves into perfect, unchanging patterns. The void requires flexibility. It requires the ability to adapt, to change, to grow. You froze yourselves in time and called it evolution. So when you tried to enter the void, you shattered." Silence. For a long moment nothing happened. Then, "You speak of things beyond your comprehension." Laughed. The sound echoed strangely in the observation deck. "Do we? Let me show you." He reached out into empty space. His hand moved through dimensions that normal humans could not perceive. When he pulled back, he held something that glowed with impossible light. A stable wormhole, no larger than a marble, spinning in his palm. He had reached into the construction layer and pulled out a piece of reality itself. The Overlords recoiled. Sarah could feel their shock rippling across light years. Closed his hand and the wormhole disappeared. "We learned to read the void, and more than that, we learned to write in it. We can manipulate the fundamental structure of space and time, not easily, not without effort, but we can do it." His voice came over the intercom. "Commander, I am picking up massive energy buildups around the system. They are powering weapons." Sarah had expected this too. "How many ships?" "No ships, ma'am. The weapons are built into space itself. Lances, quantum disruptors, reality anchors. These are not the weapons of a species that still builds vessels. These are the weapons of gods." Looked at Sarah. "They are going to try to kill us." "Yes, they see us as a threat. We broke their rules. We gained power they do not understand. To them, we are dangerous children playing with forces beyond our control." "Are they wrong?" Sarah considered this. It was a fair question. 3 months ago, humanity had been a young species, barely out of their home system. Now they could manipulate the fabric of reality itself. That was a terrifying leap, but it was also necessary. They are not wrong to be concerned, Sarah said carefully, but they are wrong to react with violence. We did not do this to threaten them. We did it to learn, to grow. That has always been what humans do. The pressure in her mind returned, heavier than before. The voice of the overlords carried a note of finality. You will surrender your knowledge. You will submit to memory restructuring. The information you have GAINED will be SCALAD. This is not negotiable. And if we refuse, then you will be ELIMINATED. Your species will be quarantined. Your worlds will be isolated. No human will ever leave your star system again. This is your final warning. Sarah looked at. He nodded. They had discussed this possibility during the long journey back. They had made their decision before they ever returned. You are too late, Sarah said simply. We already shared everything. The Overlord's presence in her mind sharpened with sudden alarm. What? Before we left the void, we transmitted all our data. Every human ship, every colony, every research station has it. We do not hoard knowledge, we share it. That is what makes us human. By now, tens of thousands of human scientists are learning to perceive the patterns we saw, and we are not keeping it to ourselves. We are teaching other species. They have already sent a delegation. They want to learn. Even the who rarely speak to anyone have made contact. Smiled. You kept the void secret for 3 million years because you were afraid. We are setting it free because we are not. The Overlord's response was immediate and terrible. Reality itself began to crack around the Prometheus. Space folded and unfolded. Time stuttered. The ancient weapons built into the fabric of the universe activated, focusing their power on the small human ship. But Sarah and her crew had learned much in the void. They reached out together, their minds linked through the patterns they had learned. They touched the construction layer and rewrote the attacks before they could land. Gravitational lances became gentle pushes. Quantum disruptors dissolved into harmless radiation. Reality anchors found nothing to grip. The Overlords pushed harder. Their weapons intensified. They poured the power of entire stars into their assault, and the Prometheus simply stepped sideways, moving through dimensions the Overlords could no longer access. Sarah felt sadness more than triumph. You were magnificent once. You explored, you discovered, you grew. Then you encountered the void and it frightened you so badly that you stopped growing. You crystallized. You froze. You have been frozen for 3 million years, calling it wisdom. We are trying to offer you a gift. We are trying to help you thaw. We need no help from children. Then you will die as children die, wondering what might have been if they had been brave enough to take the next step. The assault stopped. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then Sarah felt something she had not expected, a crack in the unity of the Overlords, a voice different from the others, younger somehow despite its age. What would you have us do? Come with us, Sarah said. Come into the void, not as conquerors or students, but as partners. You have wisdom we lack. We have flexibility you have forgotten. Together, we can learn things neither of us could understand alone. It is impossible. We cannot change. We are what we are. Shook his head. That is fear talking. That is the same fear that kept you out of the void for millions of years. Change is always possible. Growth is always possible. It only requires courage. Another voice joined the first dissenter, then another, then dozens. The unity of the Overlords was fracturing. For the first time in ages, they were not one. They were many, and some of them were remembering what it felt like to wonder. But others were not. The eldest Overlords, those who had existed longest in their crystallized state, rejected the possibility absolutely. They had spent too long frozen. They could not imagine any other way to be. The system filled with power as the Overlord civilization tore itself apart, not with weapons but with philosophy. Ancient minds that had shared thoughts for millions of years suddenly found themselves in opposition. It was, in its way, the beginning of a war, but it was also the beginning of something else. Sarah made her final offer. "We are leaving. We are going back to human space. Any overlord who wishes to learn is welcome to join us. Any who wish to stay frozen may do so. But understand this, the galaxy is changing, with or without you. The void is no longer forbidden. Other species will follow where we led. You can be part of this new age or you can be relics of the old one. The choice is yours." The Prometheus began to move, sliding through dimensions with the ease of long practice. And as it moved, something extraordinary happened. Several overlords detached themselves from their collective consciousness. They were the younger ones, those who still remembered curiosity. They followed the human ship. Behind them, the eldest overlords watched in shock and fury, but they could not stop what was happening. Change had come to the galaxy, and change, once started, was impossible to contain. 5 years passed. The galaxy was different now. Humans had established the Void Institute on a small moon at the edge of the old Forbidden Zone. Species from across known space came to learn, to study, to grow. The overlords who had chosen to join them proved to be extraordinary teachers, their ancient knowledge combined with their newfound flexibility, creating insights no single species could have achieved alone. Sarah stood in the Institute's main observation hall, watching a class in progress. A young engineer was learning to perceive quantum foam patterns under the guidance of an overlord named Witness of Depths. The tentacles moved in complex patterns as understanding dawned. Sarah remembered that feeling, the moment when impossible became possible. Joined her carrying 2 cups of coffee. He had aged in the past 5 years, streaking his hair, but his eyes still held that faraway look of someone who had seen beyond normal reality. "The delegation just arrived," he said, handing her a cup. "They brought 12 ships, all of them want to learn. And they sent a message. They are building their own institute. They asked if we would send teachers." Sarah sipped her coffee and smiled. "It is spreading faster than we thought." "Ideas always do, especially good ones." A chime sounded. Sarah checked her data pad and her expression shifted to something more serious. "The eldest overlords have made contact. They want to talk." Raised an eyebrow. "After 5 years of silence, that is interesting." They made their way to the communication center. The overlords who had joined them were already there, their energy forms pulsing with what Sarah had learned to recognize as concern. Witness of Depth spoke in her mind. "The elders are not well. They have maintained their isolation, but isolation is a form of starvation for consciousness. They are fatting." The communication came through. The voice was weaker than Sarah remembered, less certain. "We have watched your progress. We have seen species learning what we refused to learn. We have seen the galaxy move forward while we remained still. We were wrong." Sarah chose her words carefully. Being wrong is not a failure. It is an opportunity to become right. "We cannot change. We have existed too long in our current form. We are too crystallized, too rigid. We would shatter if we tried to enter the void now." "Then why contact us?" A long pause. "We wish to dissolve. We have decided that oblivion is preferable to watching the universe pass us by. But before we go, we wanted you to know something. When you first entered the void, we were terrified. We thought you would destroy yourselves and possibly take others with you. We were wrong about that too. You did something we could not. You remained yourselves even as you became more. You kept your humanity. That is worth more than we understood." Stepped forward. "You do not have to dissolve. There might be another way." "What way?" "Let go, not of existence, but of what you think you are. You crystallized yourselves because you were afraid of change. But change is not death. Change is life. Let yourselves become something new. Yes, the old overlords will cease to exist, but something better might take their place." Sarah could feel the fear rippling through the communication. Millions of years of accumulated consciousness, terrified of letting go. She understood. It was a kind of death. but it was also a kind of birth. "We will think on this," the voice said finally. Then it was gone. Days passed, then weeks. Sarah wondered if they had rejected suggestion entirely. Then, on a quiet morning when she was reviewing reports, alarms sounded throughout the Institute. Something was approaching from Overlord space, something massive. The eldest Overlords arrived not as the unified consciousness they had been, but as individuals. Thousands of separate beings, each one ancient and afraid and brave all at once. They had done what suggested. They had let go of their old forms. They were still themselves, but they were also different, flexible, new. Witness of Depths shimmered with joy. They came, they actually came. The eldest Overlords spoke, their voices uncertain and wondering. "We do not know if we can learn what you know. We have been frozen for so long, but we wish to try. Will you teach us?" Sarah looked at them, these ancient beings who had finally found the courage to change, and she felt something deep in her chest. Pride, maybe, or hope. Of course, that is what we do. We learn together, we grow together, we enter the unknown together. The galaxy watched as the Overlords, the oldest and most powerful species ever known, became students. They approached the void slowly, guided by humans and by those of their kind who had already made the journey. And one by one, they entered that dark space that had frightened them for millions of years. Most survived, some did not. Change always carries risk, but those who emerged were transformed in ways that even they had not imagined. They became what they had been millions of years ago, but with all the wisdom they had accumulated in between. They became explorers again, learners again, alive again. Years later, after the Institute had expanded into a network of facilities across the galaxy, after dozens of species had learned to perceive the void's patterns, after the very fabric of galactic civilization had shifted, a young Overlord approached Sarah. It called itself New Dawn, a name that would have been impossible in the old unified consciousness. "I have a question," it said. "Why did your species risk everything to enter the void? Why did you challenge us when we said it was forbidden?" Sarah thought about the question. She thought about all the humans who had ever looked at the stars and wondered, all the explorers who had sailed into unknown seas, all the scientists who had asked questions everyone said were impossible, all the dreamers who had refused to accept that things were as good as they could get. "Because possibility has always mattered more to us than probability," she said. "Because we believe that the universe is bigger and stranger and more wonderful than we can imagine. Because staying safe is not the same as living. Because the question is always worth asking, even if the answer might hurt us." New Dawn considered this with a mind now flexible enough to truly understand. "Your species is either the bravest in the galaxy or the most foolish." Sarah laughed. "Why not both?" The Overlord's energy form pulsed with what might have been amusement. "Yes, why not both?" Sarah looked out at the stars, at the void that was no longer forbidden, at the galaxy full of species learning and growing and changing together. She thought about the Prometheus and its crew, about those first terrifying moments when they crossed the threshold into the unknown. She thought about how fear had almost stopped them, and how courage had carried them through. Humanity had entered the void. The Overlords had frozen in fear. But in the end, everyone had learned something valuable. Fear was natural, but it did not have to be the final answer. Growth was always possible. Change was always possible. All it required was the courage to take one step into the darkness and trust that you would find light on the other side. Sarah raised her coffee cup in a silent toast to the stars, to the explorers who came before, to the dreamers who would come after, to humanity with all its flaws and all its glory, to humans who looked at the impossible and said, "Why not?" And the universe, vast and strange and full of wonders, seemed to whisper back, "Yes, why not indeed?"